Great to see you all and appreciate everyone being here. My name is Lauren McGowan. I'm the Executive Director of LIHTC Puget Sound and a board member of HDC. And we are so excited to be organizing this in partnership with the Puget Sound Regional Council. And we've got a really great lineup for you all today. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being a part of this important week around affordable housing. So today's session is all about the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act of 2025. A long title, but so important to the work that you all do each and every day. We're super excited to have an incredible lineup of speakers, really folks that are on the forefront of this important issue. So please join me in welcoming our speakers today. The first is Emily Cadik. Emily is the Chief Executive Officer of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition, where she leads advocacy to support affordable rental housing finance using LIHTC. She also was the Senior Director of Public Policy at Enterprise Community Partners and a Presidential Management Fellow at HUD. In that role, she served as a program coordinator for the Moving to Work demonstration and in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. She earned a master's degree in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a bachelor's from the University of Texas at Austin. And Emily is widely known and respected as an expert in this issue and just an incredible champion for this work. So excited to hear the latest and greatest from her. We're also joined by John Draxler. John serves as the tax counselor for Senator Maria Cantwell. He advises the senator on tax, finance, labor, and housing issues, and is her principal advisor on LIHTC. Many of us have met with him and are so appreciative of his advocacy. John grew up in Seattle, but started his career in Spokane by working with State Senator Annie Bitlig. John joined the law firm Vincent & Elkins in New York as a corporate attorney and started his current role with Senator Cantwell in 2023. John is a graduate of Gonzaga University and UCLA School of Law. Thanks for joining us, John. And then finally, somebody that is familiar to most of you is Lisa Vatske. She is the Director of Multifamily Housing and Community Facilities for the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. She's our local ambassador and advocate and knows the ins and outs of how LIHTC supports the work here in Washington. She's worked in housing and community development over the last 30 years in a variety of positions, and we're grateful to have her joining us today. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll also have some time at the end. But I'd love to start with Emily. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Well, thank you for having me. Great to be with all of you. As Lauren mentioned, even though all I do is low-income housing tax credit advocacy now, my first job was with HUD as a moving to work coordinator. So I think actually my first travel I ever got to do in my housing career was to come out and visit the Seattle and King County housing authorities and Tacoma. So soft spot in my heart for the area and for the work that you all do, and great to be here. As some of you know, I do a lot of Washington updates. I don't often have as good news as I have this week. So I'm excited to be able to share where we are with the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which hopefully many of you are familiar with since it's been around in some form since 2016, ever since Senator Cantwell got a minimum 9% low-income housing tax credit rate signed into law and said we need to think bigger about what we want to do and really challenged us as an industry to not just kind of do a technical correction here or there, but really try to move the needle on ending the affordable housing crisis and also with an eye towards something that could actually get done and get bipartisan support. So I don't want to steal any of John's thunder, but I do want to give credit to the senator and then to Congresswoman Del for joining the effort as the lead Democrat in the House on the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. And even though the good news that we got this week came out of a Republican-only effort, we know that we really have both of them to thank for leadership on these issues, which will hopefully see some of these pieces get across the finish line. So I think I've got some slides that someone is going to be sharing. So wouldn't mind pulling those up. Thank you. Great. So I'll go very quickly over what the AHCIA is, but if anyone has any questions, you can certainly let me or John know. You can go to the first slide. The quick overview is what we tried to come up with was not only something that would just increase affordable housing supply, so it's got a 50% increase in low-income housing tax credit, was really always the linchpin of the legislation. But the idea was also to have a real menu of options. And when we came up with this in 2016, we were anticipating the tax reform effort then, what became the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when the mantra going into that was any program that stays in the tax code is going to need to be reformed. And so, everyone kind of came to us and at the time said this is a 30-year-old program. What would we do to make it better? And so we came up with what is now a collection of 27 provisions to expand and strengthen the low-income housing tax credit. And so we really see this as kind of a menu, and then based on what happens in every Congress and what legislative vehicles are actually moving, we try to pluck provisions out of the AHCIA to advance them. And it's been a while since we've been able to move anything, not because of lack of support, and we'll get into just how much support there is in a minute, but because of general gridlock and the fact that we're tied up in these broader dynamics over tax policy that have limited tax legislation. So on the next slide are really the key pieces that would impact affordable housing production the most. Wouldn't mind advancing. We have one piece is, and it's exciting to run through these because these actually made it into the House tax bill. But some of the key pieces are just increasing the housing credit allocation. You all know how oversubscribed the program is. We're now getting to the point where pretty much every state in the country is oversubscribed as well. And so, we were successful thanks to Senator Cantwell's leadership in getting a 12.5% allocation increase in housing credit in 2018, but it expired in 2021. And so, we've been trying really hard to get that back. And then we'd still like to see a further expansion of the housing credit over that, but at the very least, trying to restore and get back to that previous level where we were. The other piece, which I know you all know well, is the need to lower the 50% test. So we've been trying to lower that to 25%. And if we got both of these in their full form, permanent, we get 1.3 million more affordable homes than otherwise possible. You go to the next slide, just very quickly, a quick graphic of kind of the 12.5% provision. And then the following slide, I think, is a little more maybe of interest to you all, which is to show just how many states are now in the same boat that Washington's been in for a while of needing to lower the 50% test. So I think everyone can agree that the 50% test is a arbitrary barrier to developing affordable housing and a bit of a moving target, especially as costs continue to escalate. But the states that really want to see the 50% test lowered the most are the ones that are oversubscribed. And so what started as a Washington, California, New York problem is now a Kansas, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee problem. And I will say, as someone who pretty much my whole job is to lobby for this bill, we had to do a lot of explaining of the 50% test, which is not the most elegant thing to explain to people who may not even know what low-income housing tax credit is when we first socialized this. But now, and I don't know, maybe John can tell you if he gets more questions about this, but I think this is kind of a well-socialized, well-vetted solution that everyone kind of acknowledges needs to be done. So it's nice to not feel like we're having to really make the case for this. It's really just finding the home for it. And so the next slide is, we're not going to go through the other 25 provisions in the bill, but generally speaking, the ones that would create the most affordable housing, aside from the two I mentioned, are the set of basis boosts. So there's 4 in the bill, and it's the rural basis boost for Native American communities, a state discretionary basis boost for all the 4% properties, and then the extremely low income basis boost. The rest of the bill, you can kind of describe as streamlining, good governance. A lot of them, ironically, even though they don't cost anything and there's all these pressures on costs in the reconciliation bill, couldn't actually be included in reconciliation because you have to have a revenue impact, and they don't. So what we've been doing is trying to get these provisions that A, have a revenue impact, so they're germane, and B, have the most impact on affordable housing production into this reconciliation bill. We try to attach LIHTC provisions onto any tax bill that's moving. And right now, pretty much the whole Republican agenda is tied up in the the one big beautiful bill that they're working on now. So without further ado, on the next slide, we had a pretty big week. There was an 18-hour markup in the Ways and Means Committee, and out of that came a $14.1 billion expansion of the low-income housing tax credit, and I'll get into the specifics on that in a second. But it also included some things like expanding opportunity zones. We knew opportunity zones would be in, but there's a new round of them with some rural set-asides, reinstatement of 100% bonus depreciation. I know a lot of people were concerned that, much like the last tax reform effort, there would be a cut to private activity bonds. There were no changes to bonds, so we're happy to see that. There's no change to the corporate tax rate, so also happy to see there was no decrease there. Some of these are a little in the weeds, so happy to take questions offline if needed, but wanted to mention, the new markets tax credit, even though it expires this year, was not included in the bill, which was pretty surprising, especially given the context of getting such a big expansion of the housing credit that new markets was left out here. Also, I know a lot of groups are interested in seeing the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act enacted, and that was not included in this bill either. There were a lot of cuts to the Inflation Reduction Act credits, including the 45L credit. They generated about $500 billion of the pay-fors out of cutting the IRA credit. So on the housing credit, on the next slide, if this makes it through, we've got a pretty, I think the biggest investment in the housing credit ever would be coming from this bill. So mentioned the 12.5% allocation increase that expired. It would restore that for 2026 through 2029. All of these provisions are for 26 through 29. Lowers the 50% test to 25%, includes the 30% basis boost for rural and the 30% basis boost for Native American communities. And I just got the soon-to-be published estimates from Novogradac. Hopefully those will be published tomorrow, and you'll be able to see the Washington state impacts. But these provisions would finance 527,000 more affordable homes than otherwise possible. So it's not the full AHCIA. It would be a huge investment in affordable housing and a huge step towards, addressing, not fully, but making a dent in the affordable housing crisis. So, we're going to be trying to make sure these provisions stay in the bill as it goes through the process in the House. I know there's a lot of big issues to work out. I'm sure you're seeing in the news, all the controversy around Medicaid, state and local tax deduction. John can fill you in on all that. Our job with the housing credit pieces is just to keep our head down and stay in this bill as long as this bill sticks together. So we're continuing to work on that. Meanwhile, we're continuing to build support for the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. We had a pretty tremendous rollout this year. On the House side, on the next bill, the next slide, you can see our goal when we introduced this House bill was to have more original co-sponsors than we had in the last Congress, which was 66. We had 33 Republicans and 33 Democrats. I remember thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we hit 70 to show, even more support this year? And we ended up with 119 original co-sponsors on the bill. We've got more than 2/3 of the Ways and Means Committee Republicans on, which I think is, a big reason that we were able to get the housing credit provisions in this tax bill. We have members of leadership like the House Whip, the House Conference Secretary, head of the Republican Conference in the House. We've got everyone from the Progressive Caucus to the Freedom Caucus on. And this is actually outdated. They just added a few more House co-sponsors, I think, yesterday. So including, I know you all work in Washington, but Congressman Bentz from Oregon just got on the House bill too. So good to see some Republican support from up in the Pacific Northwest. And then on the Senate side, John made our work very easy. We didn't even have to do any outreach to Senate Democrats really because he took care of it all. If you can go to the next slide, you can see how we're faring in the Senate, which is also outdated because Senator Ted Budd from North Carolina, who was a member of the House Freedom Caucus when he was in the House, just signed back onto the bill yesterday and was added with Senator Hickenlooper. So we're now up to, we ended the last Congress with 35 senators on this bill. We're now up to 38 this morning, and the bill just came out, 3 weeks ago? So, we've always had a tougher time in the Senate with Republicans, and they're coming on a lot faster, and we're getting some new ones like freshman senator from West Virginia, Jim Justice, Pete Ricketts from Nebraska signed on for the first time a couple weeks ago. So we're really making inroads, which as an advocate, it's exciting to get support from these new parts of the country. As a policy person, it's depressing that, some of these parts of the country that didn't see the need to sign on to affordable housing legislation before are now seeing the need to do so because they're hearing about it just as much as, anyone else is. But all the more reason, I think, that's why we're seeing there's housing credit provisions in this bill, even though it was a pretty crowded field to get things in. So the last thing I just wanted to highlight on the next slide was how we're doing with Washington. No shortage of support here. Of course, Senator Cantwell is our longtime lead sponsor, who is not only a sponsor, but corners other senators in the gym to ask them to sign on to this bill. So want to give her all the credit in the world here. Senator Murray's on. Susan DelBene, as I mentioned, lead Democrat of the House. We did get Dan Newhouse on, so we're glad to see that. Congresswoman Strickland is in the House queue. There is a queue of Democrats waiting to get on the bill. It's great to get your whole delegation on, but right now, especially with a Republican-only reconciliation effort going on, our priority is getting Republicans. So you've got a new one here, and you can see our top priority. Would love to get him on. He's obviously going to be in good company with other Republicans in the region. So would encourage you all to get him on. And honestly, any Republican now who can see that low-income housing tax credit provisions made it into the House-written reconciliation bill should make it, if anyone was on the fence, this should make it really easy because it shows the blessing of leadership to get on. So even, I don't think it's a coincidence that there were two new House Republicans who got on the bill yesterday after they saw what was in the House bill a few days ago. So we're doing great. We got to get some things across the finish line. I think we've all had our hearts broken by this bill a few times before, and so I don't want to act like the road is over here, but appreciate everyone's help getting us to this point and cultivating such believers in the program in Washington State. And I'll stop there. I think we'll do questions at the end, so I will turn it back to the organizers.
Thanks, Emily. Really appreciate that sort of right in time, latest breaking news on this, and really appreciate your advocacy and leadership. Let's turn it over to John to hear the great work happening in DC.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. And also thank you to Emily. Emily's the one who explained how this credit worked to me when I got started. And also Lisa helped me understand how it works on the ground in Washington State. It is the low-income housing tax credit is the longest section of the Internal Revenue Code by word count. It is absurdly complicated, but what it translates into is the largest driver of affordable housing in the country and in Washington State. So I was very excited to learn about it when I first started several years ago with Cantwell, and we've been very glad to see how far it's come and continues to go. So um, Emily went over a lot of the politics of the AHCIA and how we've gotten to today, but just to flag a couple things, it's always been a bipartisan push. That's always been the senator tries to think of a strategy of how to accomplish these things, and she's always known that we were going to need Republican support to get this done on a continuing basis. So it started with her first co-sponsor on the Finance Committee, and it continues with Senator Todd Young as her co-lead in the Senate from Indiana. But without that support, without that bipartisan support that Emily was walking through, we would never have made it into this current tax bill. So even though Cantwell wrote this bill back in 2016, the reason that a Cantwell bill ended up this close to I don't want to jinx it, but this far along in the reconciliation bill is thanks to those efforts. So the state of play is it's in the version that passed out of the Ways and Means Committee, which next it goes to the House floor. It could change anywhere between the House floor and now, so anything could happen there. And then the Senate gets its turn. So the Senate might modify this large reconciliation bill again. Just to talk about the scope of the reconciliation bill, though, this is a $5.5 trillion bill. LIHTC is a teensy tiny part of that, and we are going to try to keep it in good shape and make sure that everyone remembers all their support that they've had for it, which we're hopeful we can do as long as everyone remembers how impactful this program has been. So we've kind of got two lanes of advocacy on the DC side of this, of how we're trying to push this. One is keeping in legislation like the reconciliation bill, but the other is we want to keep up our co-sponsorship push because that's kind of the point where it becomes where this absurdly complicated program becomes inevitable in the negotiations. They have to look at the fact that that 19 Republican senators co-sponsor it, dozens of House Republicans, including however many on the Ways and Means Committee and on the Finance Committee. And that's the point where they understand what has to be in moving vehicles like this. And the way that we get those members is through the help of folks in the community that are able to articulate to their representatives and their senators that this is the program that makes a difference. Emily referred to numbers that we're expecting out of Novogradac, which Emily, I'm going to text you and ask for those numbers once I stop talking here. But the every office is a little different. So it depends on who you have a relationship with and how you know your members. So for instance, not to single anyone out specifically, but Representative Baumgartner, if you're speaking to him, knowing your relationship with him, knowing his district of Spokane and Eastern Washington, we have a tremendous amount of affordable housing and communities that have been built in the area thanks to this credit. So being able to speak to those has always been helpful with members. I know a story of one senator whose staffer sat down with some housing advocates, and the first thing the staffer said is, "All right, tell me about some cool LIHTC properties in our state," and they just talked about properties. So we've been able to do this through those stories like those, but also data, the number of units, the return and investment to communities, the amount of economic activity this generates. Um, uh, what this does for folks on the ground. We know that this saves in Medicaid receipts and Medicare receipts and emergency room visits, in educational outcomes. This is all backed up by data, so it depends on the member. And really being able to pivot. So for instance, I mean, again, we've got so much support from the Democratic side of the aisle on these human outcomes, but there's also these business arguments that can be made. And we've been trying to, I call it the spaghetti method, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. But I think over the course of these past 9 years, that's really what's helped this bill. And we're there's a lot to unpack over this $5.5 trillion bill, but we are very excited to see LIHTC moving forward and hope that it keeps moving. So I came in a little short on time, but that's really all I wanted to add to what Emily and I think Lisa are going to say here. So happy to answer any questions as we get to that.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate all of your work on this. Lisa, let's turn it over to you and hear how this impacts us here in Washington.
Yes, thanks so much. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to be sitting on a panel with these folks and talk about how this really translates on the ground here in Washington State. Yep, do have some slides. Thank you for transitioning. No, let's go back to the pie first. Can we do the pie? Thanks. So, none of these things are solely finance housing in our state. Our state has historically, had a lot of investment at the state level. And that's what's so important and exciting about these provisions, because we've continued to invest so deeply at the state level. And given that no one source fully funds any of these projects, in order to really keep up with the level of investment that we've had at the state, we really do need these additional resources coming from the federal level, especially as it pertains to the low-income housing tax credit, because that has been a major source of funding for most of the projects that we're doing here in the state. And from this pie, you can see that really between tax-exempt bonds, which is that private debt piece, and then the tax credit equity, that's usually 75 to 80% of the actual funding of these projects. So a really critical piece in making these projects work. And then just some examples. We could go to this next slide. Just wanted to show a couple of examples of what's happened most recently with both the 9% and the 4% credits, but this is specifically a 9% project that we did with Chief Seattle Club, the Sacred Medicine House. And The 9% program funded half of that $33 million investment, again, because in the city of Seattle and King County, we have a lot of local resources in addition to the state resources. We can be more like 50% in the Seattle King County area, where we are typically in the balance of state 75 to 80% of the project sources. So it really does depend on where we are in the state, but these resources continue to be a really critical piece of developing this housing. But this is 117 studio homes, and it's serving very low-income folks, and is a permanent supportive housing model. And we, in our state, typically have been using our 9%, which is that deeper subsidy program, to really support homeless housing and permanent supportive housing. And it's been a really powerful tool for really trying to address our homeless issues. And so, yeah, really excited by the Chief Seattle Club being able to lean in and develop more recently. And this is one of the projects that was able to be put together with, again, a whole stack of resources, but a majority coming from private equity through the low-income housing tax credit. Next slide is Cedar Crossing. And this is a project that was a combination of a lot of great community partners, Bellwether Housing and Mercy Housing. This is a bond deal where we used private activity bonds and the 4% housing tax credit. And again, a pretty large development at a transit station. With our partnership with Sound Transit, we have a lot of build out of our Sound Transit and our transit systems. And there is, through the work of former House Speaker Frank Chop, his legacy is that he ensured that there would be affordable housing at these transit centers by putting that requirement into legislation. And so we have a huge pipeline of affordable housing projects near Sound Transit stations, which has put, an additional constraint and need for additional bond resources in our state. And that's part of the reason why we've been in such a backlog. We've been trying to be as creative as possible and strategic as possible by moving to a pipeline process. But we know that there are considerable amount of Sound Transit sites that are looking to develop affordable housing around them. And again, such a critical piece of these new provisions. The lowering of the 50% tests would really allow us to double down in these next few years, which would be a huge opportunity for us to really address some of the needs, especially around these Sound Transit sites. But again, 254 units, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. And yeah, really great opportunity. There's ground floor amenities and a childcare facility operated by El Centro de la Raza. So a big community development effort in addition to the housing. So one of the things I want to talk about as well is, we pivoted again in our state because we had such a backlog and have been so oversubscribed in our private activity bond cap and 4% program. We limited the amount of acquisition rehabs that we've done through the program and really focused on new construction. And one of the things, especially as we're seeing this aging portfolio and concerned about actually the loss of affordable units, now that we're seeing projects come to the end of their regulatory agreement, we're really, again, excited about the opportunities that would lend itself with a lowering of the 50% test, and really looking at doing perhaps a whole nother path for acquisition rehabilitation in these next few years. So really opening up the preservation piece of this, because we can continue to try to add more units, but if we continue to lose them, then we're not really making progress. So really important tool for us in these next few years if we are able to actually get that lowering of the 50% test. And then, on the 9% side, we really have, again, back to this, we had the increase in state investment at a time where we lost that 12.5%. That was a a pretty big hit to us when that sunset. And so to be able to bring that back to the table, especially at a point in time when we continue to see historic investment levels at the state, to be able to pair that and leverage with additional 9% credit will be a huge opportunity. Certainly continue to watch the market and the volatility and the appetite and the pricing. So there's still a lot of challenges and variables with kind of putting the whole financing stack together. But if we don't even have the tools to work with, then, again, we're kind of treading or even dead in the water, so to speak. So really huge opportunity if we can get these new provisions in. And we continue to work in our region. We've had some great partnerships with Amazon and Microsoft, trying to come up with some alternative financing sources. But still, the main generator of housing are these two financing tools. So, again, our state, I think, is unique in that we continue to really invest and care about housing and understand the importance of housing as not only just the stability for the tenants, but the economic engine that it creates as well. And so, yeah, we're continuing to try to support all the efforts at the federal level, both with Emily and John and the senator and the representative in their offices to make sure the story is being told in terms of how these resources really make an impact on the local level. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for your leadership and for sharing. It's super helpful, I think, to hear these specific examples. So we've got lots of great information from some of the folks leading the charge on this important effort. Do folks have any questions for our speakers? And you can write them in the chat or raise your hand. I will start with Emily and just ask, what are the biggest misconceptions or sort of challenging questions that you get related to this?
Yeah, well, one of the ones that there was a question I was getting that bothered me so much that we commissioned research to answer it, which was this conception of, the credits just go to, developers and corporations and don't actually go to residents. And while it's of course true that it is, corporations who ultimately claim the credits and developers who pass the credits on to those corporations, we all know that the residents are benefiting, but aside from property level data and some of the developers we work with, would bring into Hill visits really compelling, here's our market study, here's how much our residents are saving at this property. But it was really more one-off. And so we wanted to get something that spoke to it more in the aggregate. So we bought a set of data from Moody's to compare what housing credit tenants are paying compared to market. And we found that the average savings are about $670 per month, which amounts to more than $7,000 of savings per year compared to market, which, considering a minimum wage full-time worker makes $15,000 per year, that's the equivalent of having another minimum wage job for half the year. So it's huge, and being able to just have those numbers to say, not only do we know the residents benefit, but here's how much, on average, and we broke that out for a lot of cities as well. I can't remember offhand what it is for Seattle, but I think that helps dispel that a bit. I mean, you're never going to be able to dispute the fact that, so the private sector has to be involved and there has to be some return for them to be involved, but the ultimate beneficiaries are residents. And so that's one of the ones we, I think have been successfully pushing back on. But, it's pretty rare at this point that we get members who tell us anything negative about the program. I remember when I first started advocating for this bill, I remember bringing my action fact sheet to a South Dakota member's office in probably 2017, right after the bill was first introduced, and laid out, here's how many South Dakota residents pay more than half of their income in rent. And the staff members said, yeah, that doesn't seem like a lot of people. I was like, well, I'm sure, I'm surprised you said that out loud, but okay, maybe this isn't an issue for you. And I remember hearing that a couple times, again, pretty rare. Most people don't say the quiet part out loud, but now, again, this is good as an advocate, bad from a policy perspective, but going into South Dakota, North Dakota, Kansas, all these places that everyone thought of as more affordable cost of living states are now saying that's the issue we're hearing about all the time when we get home. Even Chairman Crapo, he was tweeting yesterday, I'm doing this housing survey. I want to hear from Idahoans about, your housing concerns and stuff. So everyone's getting hit now. And, I think a lot of times, and I'd be interested in what Don's take is on this too, but, I think a lot of times they don't say we have a problem with the credit. It's more, how are we going to pay for it? What does the overall package look like? Things like that. And so, we always tell them, it's not really our job to figure out, are you going to pay for this by cutting Medicaid or cutting IRA credits or whatever a Congress decides to do, or on the Democratic side, whatever they might use to pay for it as well. But, to just kind of try to get this attached no matter what. But we don't hear a lot of no. It's just a lot of members who are, quote, looking at the bill for like 7-8 years, things like that.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, can I flip that to John? John, do you hear any pushback from members?
To be honest, I'm more surprised when there are questions than when there aren't. It's very rare these days, thanks to the work that Emily, Lisa, and Senator Cantwell have done over the years to socialize this bill. The hardest common one is how much does it cost? Not just because that's hard to answer if we don't have an assessment yet. But also, what do you mean by that? Do you mean how much does it cost based on the JCT score, but at the same time, the biggest juxtaposition for me is last year when we got to the 5-yard line, we had a provision that cost $6.2 billion to do this. But when you crunch Novogradic's numbers, that brought in that $6.2 billion returned $11.2 billion in tax revenue, state, local, and federal, because of all the economic activity this was generating. So that question got hard based on what you think the office is looking for when they ask that question. And then the hardest obscure question I got is, what does LIHTC do to make sure that these are good properties? And I know Emily and Lisa have dealt with this question a lot. But I mean, to me, there's intuitive business logic to making sure that these are good properties, because number one, it's a competitive application. For every LIHTC property that gets approved, you're facing Lisa or someone else could tell you the latest numbers, but 3+ other properties are not getting credits. So they have a huge incentive to be good for residents, to show good community development and match the qualified allocation plan's needs. But and then this is a 15-year investment with threat of credit recapture and all these things that really force you to the point that I wish I could own a LIHTC unit rather than have to buy a first single family home that it's from someone who immediately exits the property, when there's no incentive to make sure that that property holds up 15 years down the line, let alone 6 months. So those are the two questions that I often find fascinating.
Then I would
Yes.
just add, kind of at the state level, and we've had kind of the roller coaster of this being an issue or being less of an issue, but costs, the overall costs of producing the housing, folks not appreciating that construction materials and labor are at the center of the major costs. Folks assuming that, well, it's just the attorneys and the architects who are, making all the money here. And it's just like, yeah, no, like, 75% of the costs of these projects are in materials and labor. And so, and that has, again, been, there's a lot of volatility to construction material costs and labor, on the labor side. I mean, we want to pay folks living wages so that, hopefully they can at least afford to even be in these units. So, yeah, I think, there's a lot of, so costs overall, I think, has been an ongoing dialogue. I think in my 30-year history of being in this space, we've done, at least 3 cost studies or audits, or, the state and or nationally has been audited on the costs. And yeah, there is no like one thing. It's a multiple of things that contribute to the costs. And so that's another big piece that I think over time we've had to address. So
Thank you, guys. Lisa, if you were able to predict out, what do you think will change for folks in this, in this audience, if these provisions were to go forward?
Well, I think, yeah, we would be able to bring online more units sooner. We could address some of the preservation, the long-term sustainability and preservation issues. That's top of mind for us right now as we're, kind of contemplating a lot. Like I said, some units just, getting to the end of their regulatory agreement, and there not being a lot of tools in place to really preserve those. So, and again, because of the policy decisions and the backlog and the need for continuing to try to add stock, we've really focused on the new construction side. So, yeah, I think that's a really big piece, is being able to really invest in some preservation efforts. But yeah, just, continuing, because we're in this pipeline situation, we know and have a list of projects that are probably 5 years out, basically. And so, the opportunity to really bring on these developments sooner just seems like it meets the needs of our citizens that much better and sooner. And so, yeah, I think it's a real opportunity to continue to address, which is really an affordable housing crisis in our state. So.
Thanks, Lisa. So we've got a question from Brian here in the chat. It's really exciting to see the increasing bipartisanship on affordable housing. Is there an easy reference diagram or list of the new opportunity zones that is available, particularly the rural ones? Curious how new
I saw
Washington. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the governors are going to need to designate the opportunity zones. So that's something that you can, advocate for if you'd like. I am not the opportunity zone expert, but I would suggest referencing Novogradac has a lot of great resources, and EIG is the other main group that's been working on opportunity zones. It's a rural set aside though, so I don't think that, they'll have to take that into account as they designate them, but they have it's not like they have in the bill specifying where all those zones are going to be.
Thanks, Emily. Emily, what can this group of people, we've got advocates, developers, incredible leaders across our state, what can folks do to make sure these provisions are kept in? How can we advocate from here?
Yeah, well, you've got one House Republican left, so I would get him on the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. And I think especially as a newer member, saying this is something the House is planning to pass anyway, and the rest of the delegation support, you can take credit here, just help set that support for the future too. Obviously, you don't have much work you need to do with your senators, other than, I think what Lisa's been doing, sharing that state-specific data to keep giving, Senator Cantwell the fuel she needs to, keep not just making the case, but knowing exactly what her efforts are going to lead to, every month, every week. But yeah, I think we're in a really, I don't want to say, as an advocate, I never want to say, we're done here. We're definitely not. Right now, though, we're in a better spot than we've been in a really long time. So we hope that we are, aside from continuing to add Republicans, and there's, a couple hundred more around the country, we still want to get on this bill, and you've only got one, so I can't give you too many other marching orders. But, we're just going to keep fighting. And then, as soon as this hopefully passes, we're going to need to figure out the next steps. What does the new HCIA look like? What's the next thing we need? Do we have enough demand in the market? Or are there some things we can do on the regulatory side or in legislation to help make sure we've got, more investors coming in if we've got all these credits. So, after we all hopefully take a little vacation after we finally get something done here, there's still going to be plenty of work to do.
Thanks, Emily. All right, do we have any final questions from folks? If not, I want to thank Alyssa and Robin with the Puget Sound Regional Council. Really appreciate their work. Emily, John, Lisa, thank you for your leadership and work and the call to action. We're doing well here in Washington. There's more we can do, and this is just such an exciting opportunity and moment for our field. So we will certainly send out some of that call to action work to everybody here. And just want to thank you all for participating, for being part of Affordable Housing Week, and thanks for all you do each and every day. Hope everyone has a